Okay. Pause the recording. Okay, and got the closed caption on too. Well, welcome to the Journal-isms Roundtable. My name is Richard Prince, and I write an online column called Journal-isms, that's journal-isms.com, on diversity issues in the news business. This roundtable is an extension of that. We started the roundtable in 1999 when a friend of ours was leaving to pursue a doctorate. He said, keep these going, and we have. We met every month in various restaurants in Washington, D.C. until the COVID pandemic, when we switched to Zoom. Our participation multiplied, and we hope to have more roundtables that are hybrid, that is, meeting in person, as well as having people attend the Zoom. We've had 6 of those so far, but we're having a little trouble finding suitable venues. So if anybody has any suggestions or knows of people who'll be glad to host us, let me know. A special, we think of this as an online dinner party with the purpose to network and to learn. Some of the networking goes on in the chat room, so please feel free to make use of it. Special welcome to those on Facebook. Please leave messages in the comments section if you want to reach us. All comments are on the record, and we ask everyone to be respectful of other people's time. So please be succinct and to the comments are on the record. And we ask everyone to be respectful of other people's time. So please be succinct and to the point. Comments are on the record. And we ask everyone to be respectful of other people's time. So please be succinct. All right, I don't know where that echo comes from, but we'll see if we can get rid of it. All right. We're fortunate. Our topic today is the aftermath of the election and what comes next, what journalists should know. And we're fortunate to have some people who can shed some cogent light on that from various perspectives. And we're ready to hear from them this morning. As many I saw from my note, Donald Trump was on Meet the Press with Kristen Welker, and he gave an indication of what he has in store. Basically, everything he said during the campaign, or mostly everything he said during the campaign, he is now saying as the president-elect. And so while it was easy to dismiss what he was saying for some while it was just campaigning, now he really may do all that. So we'll have some perspectives on that. I want to start with Linda Jones because uh, she is uh, one who has worked with Black women who are especially touched by the results of the election. And she's a writing and emotional wellness doula. And I've spoken with a number of Black women, especially who had put their hopes into Kamala Harris's campaign and were, how should we say, they were not pleased and a little sent off, it was sent a little off balance uh, when they learned the results. So I want to hear from Linda first to tell us, everyone will have 3 minutes, by the way, all of our panelists, to tell us what she recommends for those people, what she has observed about this, and what advice she has for journalists in dealing with this and other things that might come to mind. So Linda, you're on. Please take it away.
All right. You would put me first, right?
Yeah, of
Thank
course.
you. Thank you for inviting me. Um, well, hmm, we already know that Trump's history with working with journalists, Black journalists, particularly women, has been hostile, disrespectful. And I don't expect that would change anytime soon. And so my recommendation for Black women journalists and Black journalists in general, and those of us, those of you who have to, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
And those of you who have to work with this administration or cover this administration is to, as simple as it sounds, we don't do it often, is to take care of yourselves, to have an outlet um, to release some of that stress that's definitely going to build up with the kind of work that you do. Our work, I used to work in newspapers and I still work with writing. But we already know the stress that that work carries. And Black women in particular uh, habitually repress a lot of our feelings for fear of being seen as weak, right? Particularly in professional settings. And that can take its toll. It's already has taken its toll. We're supposed to be resting now, but how many of us really are? So, getting into next year, we need to have some things in place to make sure we can keep ourselves stabilized, right? If you don't have a therapist on call or a coach on call, there is that kind of writing, even though we do it as our profession, not the writing that brings us stress on deadline, but that personal writing as a way to release. And it has to be a constant practice, the constant practice of releasing, having a release valve. And that can be through what we know already in our writing, but the personal writing and also being in community. So I think my time is up, but also being in community, but basically monitoring how you're feeling at all times when you're doing this work going into this administration.
Okay, thank you. We're going to have time for questions and more discussion about that. I want to ask next for Patrick Mason to give us his thoughts. Patrick is chair of the economics department at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, And this morning, Trump said that the reason he won were two things, the border and groceries, the price of groceries. And that's what he attributed his success to. So uh, there has been some back and forth about how much of a role the economy played in Trump's victory. And I want to ask Professor Mason to give us a little more about uh, what a president can do about the economy and how he sees things from the economic perspective, what we should be looking for, and what we should know as January 20th approaches. So, Professor, please enlighten us. Oh, I think you need to unmute.
Okay. Yeah, sorry about that.
Yes.
Yeah. A presidential administration can have an impact on the economy through fiscal policy and through regulatory activities. I mean, monetary policy is usually handled by the Federal Reserve. I am worried about many things with this administration. The threatened mass deportations will have a very negative impact. And actually, the impact could be very large on some of the largest states in the country. I mean, the state of Florida has about 850,000 undocumented immigrants. I doubt if that many people will be deported out of one state, but they work in agriculture, they work in construction, they work in hospitality. It will have a negative impact on the state. And I think California, Texas, and New York will be facing similar circumstances. Those are the four biggest states in the country. I worry about the threatened impact of tariffs. I mean, tariffs raise the price of things coming into the country, goods that can be used by other industries. So when you raise the price of things of imports that are used in the production process for other activities, it will raise the price of those items as well. And, you know, when you put those two things together, where you have tariffs on things that you're buying from others, and you're trying to deport people who are already here, it's kind of like you're closing off the economy to the closing off the international sector of the economy, which won't be good for the overall economy in the country. And then there's been a threat of cuts in social programs because conservatives always like to give large tax cuts to rich people. Well, how do you finance those tax cuts? You finance them by cuts in social programs. And to the programs with the money, Social Security, I was reading about the threatened cuts to the VA, threatened cuts to healthcare. So I don't think this will be good overall for most African Americans and for working class people. And it will not, I mean, if he actually did these things, it will be inflationary.
Mhm.
And so, you know, tariffs raise prices. Basically, one way to think about a tariff, if it's a consumer tax. And that's another thing that kind of worries me in the direction of this program, because they also want to cut IRS agents so that they can't monitor the taxes of highly affluent people, right? You always follow the money. And so you have these cuts and programs, and then how do you make up the tax revenue? You have to tax something. Well, if you're not going to tax income and you're not going to tax the wealth of rich people, then you have to have a consumption tax. And a consumption tax is where you place taxes on goods and services that people buy. And those taxes fall disproportionately on low income people and middle income people. So that when you look at the impact of the economic policies that they're suggesting, it's really to redistribute income upward. And I think that would be very bad.
Wow. Well, you know, I have a question about the tariffs. Everything I've read seems to be negative about the idea of raising tariffs, and that it will increase consumer prices. So do you think that maybe this might be something that Trump might back down from because of this negative feedback?
Well, I don't know if he will back down. I mean, I don't. That kind of takes me into a realm where I'm not sure
Okay, well
about
that's fine.
things.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
if he doesn't back down, it will have very negative impacts. It's one of the few times I've seen economists united across political spectrums,
Mm.
right? Especially the size of the tariffs that he's talking about. I mean, he says a lot of things, and a lot of it is bombastic and foolish. Uh, so I mean, I always take his intent to be very seriously, but exactly what he will try to do is sometimes difficult to assess. But tariffs across the board, when you start talking about placing a tariff on items that are coming from Canada and Mexico,
Hmm.
right? One of the things that we import from both of those countries is petroleum. So you're going to place a tariff on petroleum coming into the country from Canada and from Mexico. Well, petroleum is used in a lot of things, not just gasoline, but it's used to power energy. So that will be highly inflationary, right? And not only that, but this thing works two ways. So when you place a tariff on Canada and Mexico, things that you're buying from them, you buy less of it because the price is higher. They will respond by placing a tariff on goods that they purchase from America, which means that we will sell less of it, which means that it will cost jobs here. So the only clear rationale that I see to his economic policies is trying to find a ways to redistribute income towards wealthy people, right? So that you can get tax cuts, for wealthy people, so to make them richer. And maybe the tariffs will be strategically aimed at industries that compete with the people who finance Trump, right? So the tariffs aren't so much economically oriented as they're politically oriented. I don't really, but he keeps talking about doing them across industries. And the other thing that's a big problem is deregulation, right? So that corporations will be given the power to do what they want to do environmentally, do what they want to do in terms of behavior towards their own workforce, right? As I say, collectively, when you look at these economic policies, they're just bad, right? And they designed to redistribute wealth and power towards the most affluent people.
Hmm. I hear you. Okay. All right, we're going to move to the environment now. We have Evlondo Cooper here from Media Matters, who covers how the media deal with questions of the environment and climate change and all that. I think Trump is known as a climate denier. I don't know if he still is, but he was at one point. And we've made some progress in the environment with climate change globally, but also in our inner cities, where I think you talked last time about heat zones caused by high rises that concentrate heat on sidewalks and people who live in these tightly populated areas. And I wonder what you think about what's going to happen with all that going forward.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and I'm happy to be on with an esteemed panel of guests. Yeah, look, the cabinet nominations signal a clear strategy. Trump is placing fossil fuel advocates like Chris Wright at DOE and environmental regulation opponents like Lee Zeldin at EPA because they want to fundamentally reshape and undermine what I believe is the minimal climate action that's happened under the last few administrations. He's going to plan to eliminate environmental justice offices across the country, redrawing national monument boundaries to enable drilling. And these aren't isolated changes, but part of a coordinated, planned dismantling. So in covering what Trump's going to do with the environment and with climate change, there are some lessons from the first term that the media definitely should not repeat. During Trump's first term, newsrooms got caught in these reactive coverage cycles, chasing his inflammatory tweets and the drama around the administration, while Trump dismantled environment regulations during his first term, He rolled back more than 100 environmental rules, but the coverage, specifically around climate and environment, largely focused on the political theater, the inflammatory statements. And we can't repeat that mistake. When covering the environmental challenges that Trump is going to pose and the climate inaction at the national and global level, was talking about pulling out of Paris, for instance. Again, journalists need to focus on the impacts rather than the theatrics. So pointing the way forward, I think it demands a fundamental transformation in how newsrooms cover the administration. They need dedicated climate teams. They need to develop expertise across all their beats. They need to move past the false balance that treated industry-funded climate denial as legitimate debate, which we're going to see a lot of. They need to restructure how they cover power generally, tracking agency gutting, documenting regulatory rollbacks, investigating corporate capture of policy, and connecting federal decisions to community impacts, especially among vulnerable communities, Black and brown communities across the country. There was some progress made on lead, for instance. I believe Trump's going to roll back all of that. And so we're going to see Black and brown communities, other vulnerable communities, poor communities, again, suffering the brunt impact of climate change and environmental pollution. But this isn't just about better climate and environmental coverage. It's about evolving journalism to meet these systemic challenges of covering an administration like this. They need to move beyond traditional frameworks that normalize environmental and climate destruction and develop new approaches that properly convey the scale of what's happening and, more importantly, hold power accountable. These challenges existed long before the Trump administration and will persist long after, but the question is whether our journalism can evolve to meet them. Thank you.
Yes. Okay, I want to ask Margaret Huang from the Southern Poverty Law Center to be next. During this campaign, there was quite a lot of polarization. People talk about hate speech becoming normalized. This business about the Haitians eating animals and all that, things that used to be shocking before and immediately condemned, have now become as I said, normalized. So is this what we can expect in the next 4 years? And if so, how should we be reporting all of this? Margaret, please let us know.
Thanks so much, Richard, and I appreciate being invited to join today. What a great conversation already. Since 1990, the Southern Poverty Law Center has been tracking hate and extremist groups in this country, and when we started, it was not partisan. In fact, both parties were eager to disavow and to distance themselves from extremist ideology. That is not true today, and Trump, as you said, has very much normalized and mainstreamed extremists and other hate groups across the country, and we're already seeing it. In fact, in this year's FBI hate crime statistics from 2023, we've already seen a rise in some record numbers across the board for various communities that are under attack. So there's a couple of things that are important for journalists to do. First is, as Trump's narrative, his campaign, his interview this morning have emphasized, he is going to embolden those who embrace this ideology. And in particular, we're going to need to keep an eye out on the pardons we're anticipating of the January 6th insurrectionists. It's going to be really important that journalists avoid legitimizing hateful ideology as a valid or legitimate viewpoint. It's really important that you continue to provide different perspectives, but you cannot give any credence or legitimacy to those who are embracing hateful ideology. And that's going to be a little tricky because it's also going to be embraced by elected officials or people in positions of authority throughout government. But I think journalists have this really important role to play to distinguish between different political perspectives, people who might agree that with some of the positions of the January 6 folks, but who are not actually advocating for the violent overthrow of government, or who are not actually advocating for the return to other times of our history where people were treated as second-class or less citizens. The second thing I would lift up is around his call to deport migrants from the country, whether that is people who have been here for centuries, people who have been with citizenship for many years, or people who've crossed the border. And I think it's really clear to me, as someone already noted, he is not going to go after Florida or Texas. He's going to go after blue states, and he's going to use this as a way to go after progressive leadership in the country and to create problems for them. Not only is he threatening to mobilize National Guard, perhaps even the military, to enforce his border policies, but I think it's highly likely that he is going to give full opportunity to privately run militias, again, some of these hate and extremist groups, to be deputized to enforce immigration law. And we're going to see those kinds of activities springing up in California, in New York, in Illinois, and Minnesota, places where they have embraced a much more open commitment to welcoming people into our communities. So again, it's going to be vital in this case that journalists actually write stories about how communities are resisting. We need to give people a sense of hope that we're not allowing this to happen. Nobody is accepting this, but it's going to be really important to talk about forms of resistance, ways that communities have pushed back, ways that maybe not typical allies have worked together to actually protect their communities. And I think those are going to be some of the best stories we're going to see over the next 4 years.
All right, I'm looking forward to those. Okay, now let's talk about our own industry here, the media. I mentioned earlier the Foreign Press Association, which had an awards night earlier a few days ago, and the Committee to Protect Journalists was there, and one of the things that the president there mentioned was she felt that because Trump is going after the press with such aggression, he and his cabinet folks, that there might be a lot of self-censorship that she feared would take place, such as Jeff Bezos did at the Washington Post, Patrick Cheung soon at the LA Times, and even, regular people, right on the ground, reporters. So I want to ask Clayton Wiemers, who is the U.S. Chief of the Reporters Without Borders organization, to give us his perspective on what we should be on the lookout for and how we should conduct ourselves as we become more and more under assault. So Clayton, please take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Yeah, as Richard mentioned, I'm the U.S. Director for Reporters Without Borders. And if you're not familiar with our organization, we're the world's largest NGO that's devoted to free press and the right to information. And we have offices in 14 different countries around the world. And so one of the real advantages is that we are monitoring everything that's going on all around the globe. And it gives us the perspective to say what's happening in the United States. We've seen it before. We've seen this playbook rolled out in other authoritarian countries, and it helps give some indication of what's coming next. And so it's so important for everyone to be acutely aware of some of the threats that could be coming down from the Trump administration in terms of press freedom. But we also have to note that the United States had been lagging in terms of press freedom for years going into this election. We rank every country in the world according to press freedom, and Americans are typically shocked when I inform them that the United States ranks 55th out of 180 countries, and that is before Trump took office. So there are clearly big structural problems that get in the way of having the truly free press that I think we all aspire to, and that we probably all agree that the country of the First Amendment ought to enjoy. I would really encourage everyone on this call to think about press freedom in a very holistic way, which is the viewpoint that I think really distinguishes Reporters Without Borders from some other groups that are in this space. We think of press freedom threats generally falling into four different categories, right? The first is your first order press freedom issues, which largely comes down to things like safety and access. So a journalist is arrested. That's a first order press freedom problem, or is assaulted while covering a protest, something like that. The Trump administration cuts back access to the White House briefing room, or messes around with accreditation. Those are the sorts of things that we're anticipating and that I think we're ready for. And I think a lot of journalists are starting to get in the headspace of being ready for as well. I really want folks to also think about the bigger existential threats to journalism as well. So that second bucket is the relationship between the media and the general public. And increasingly, I'm convinced that this is kind of the key to the problem in the United States right now, is that there's a growing distrust of the media from the general public. But worse than that, I think this election has really given a proof point to the idea that journalism as an institution is becoming increasingly irrelevant for more and more Americans. And that's really frightening for anyone who values democracy, I think. It's not that Americans are turning away from the media itself, it's that they're turning away from journalistic media. They're getting their information from other types of sources that don't follow the same level of ethical diligence that your typical journalist will. And what that means is they're getting unverified information, and they're getting an onslaught of constant information that is making it harder and harder to distinguish fact from fiction. There was a really startling statistic published by Pew Research a couple weeks ago that said that 40% of 18 to 29-year-olds get their news from social media influencers. That right there is an existential threat to journalism. If people are turning away from journalists and from trusted news sources to get information from unverified sources of information, then we are truly losing the battle for what is the truth. So that second level of threat to press freedom, the media's relationship with the public, to me is very important. The third category that we look at is the marketplace. I don't think it's a surprise to anyone here that that the economics of news are themselves a threat to press freedom when you see thousands of media workers getting laid off year after year, and news outlets shuttering, and obviously the disappearance of local news everywhere in this country. There's not a state in the union that has more newspapers today than it did 20 years ago. In fact, they all have less. And so the growth of news deserts is especially startling. There was another study that came out yesterday from the Medill School's local news initiative that showed that Trump won 91% of the news desert counties. He won those counties in an absolute landslide. So that's pretty telling. I think there's a clear link between the disappearance of local news and the growth of distrust in institutions, because as a person in your community, not seeing your community reflected back at you in the media, that's very alienating. Local journalism really has the power to bring communities together. It does so much more than just tell you what's going on in politics or who's winning in an election. It actually informs you about what's going on with your friends and family and neighbors, and helps bind communities together. So we really think that fixing the marketplace for news is an existential problem for journalism. And then the fourth category that we think about the threats happening in is the information space more broadly. And here we're talking about mis and disinformation online, or the term that we prefer to use at Reporters Without Borders, propaganda. And we think of propaganda as yet another existential threat to journalism, partly because propaganda so often tries to displace journalism directly by mimicking it, by stealing its hallmarks, by stealing its authority, so that it can confuse or convince something of something that isn't real. But frankly, the purpose of propaganda often isn't to make you believe something that isn't true. It's just to make you believe nothing at all. And that leads to more disengagement, more turning away from the news, which we're all experiencing right now. I think we all have friends who are telling them right now, oh, I love you and your journalism, but I just can't deal with the news right now. It's so common right now. I think we've all heard it. So we really need to think of the way that the information space, especially online, is being structured as itself a threat to press freedom. When we have the new conduits of information being controlled by billionaires like Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg, we need to hold them more accountable. We need to find democratic safeguards and transparent safeguards that will help make us understand how information is getting to people and how we can ensure the free flow of information rather than a very shall I say colored view of the world that often you get from social media. So I've gone on way too long here, so I'm gonna pause there.
Okay, thank you, Clayton. All right, I think I see people have already started asking questions in the chat room. So we're going to take a few people who have posted those. McNelly Torres is one of them. McNelly, a longtime investigative reporter. McNelly, what questions do you have?
Well, I have a lot of questions, but more, I am very worried about obviously the state of the media. I was affected by that in my newsroom. We all lost our jobs. And, we became the first investigative nonprofit in the country that was very diverse. We achieved something that, we've been trying to do in a lot of newsrooms. So we're no longer there. And I am very concerned about violence against journalists, because I just can see this happening here. And I've already started conversations with IRE to see if we can bring
That's investigative reporters and editors, for those who don't know.
yes. And I just think that we can learn. As I'm so glad, by the way, it's such an honor to be here with all of you, that we can learn a lot from journalists who cover oppressive countries of how they do it. And we need to take a look at learn from them, because we are going to be facing a lot of obstacles. But number one, security. I am very concerned that, we saw that during his first administration, when he will send these, crazy tweets, and all of a sudden there was a loner walking into Walmart in El Paso and, killing Latinos. Who is it to say that it's not going to happen to journalists? And we need to be prepared. We need to have a plan of action. And those are the things that, I approach folks at IRE saying, I am sure the New York Times, the big newsrooms, they're having conversations about this. If I was in my newsroom, my prior newsroom, I would have been having conversations, in the newsroom overall, how we are going to deal with physical attacks, how we are going to be dealing with digital attacks, trying to hack. I mean, we had that happening in one story with anti-vaxxers a couple of years ago. So, and the biggest thing to me is also how we cover this administration. I just really don't believe the media has taken a postmortem and learned the lessons of the first administration and during this campaign, and how many things have been normalized, like the whole thing about Haitians eating pets, which is just the most horrendous thing that I have ever heard. And we are going to continue on this. We got to have all sides, or we need to have more than one side. We need to be objective. When there are situations and stories where we cannot cover that the same way, like Trump was not your typical candidate. Why are we covering him? We're covering him as he was your typical candidate. And my argument when I am having these conversations with other journalists is, was there two sides in the Holocaust? Were two sides during slavery here? No, there was only the bad side, that we had to cover it. So I just really think that the media, in a way, especially the big ones, they need to look at themselves in the mirror moving forward, because I am really worried, guys. I don't know if you guys are, but I am really worried. I'm worried about our profession, our trade, but I am really worried about what's going to happen after January 20th and with this administration.
Okay, thank you, McNelly. So Rochelle Riley has her hand up. Rochelle, can you hear us?
Unmute myself. Hello to everyone I know, and happy holidays to those and the ones I don't. Please forgive that I'm not showing you my face. I'm under the weather. I have a runny nose. You don't want to see it.
Tell us who you are first, and then you can answer
I
questions.
am Director of Arts and Culture for the City of Detroit after spending almost 20 years as a syndicated columnist for the Detroit Free Press. And before that, I was in Louisville, Kentucky. And before that, I was in Dallas, Texas. And for those of you who are still in the trenches, thank you so much for being there. I'm glad that Clayton is on because I share the same concerns that were just raised. And my questions are twofold. One is the committee does lots of work all over the globe. I'm trying to figure out whether you're going to have to do more domestic work to protect journalists as we deal with a situation we've never faced before. And the second thing is, how do we deal with the real problem that a lot of the people who own the television stations and own the newspapers do not disagree with some of the things that we would be covering differently were it 10 or 15 years ago. So, and that's for our experts who are on the call. But those are the things that I have the same fears, and I mean despairing fears about where we're headed and what journalists can actually do. Hello, Hazel Edney. I'm glad to see you. I'm sorry. I guess we could start with Clayton, but anybody who just wants to talk about that real problem.
Yeah, I guess to your first question, it's the discussion we're having pretty much every day right now as an organization, and we're talking about it with some of our peers in the space too, is how can we invest more resources in countering what we anticipate to be the primary threats to press freedom in this country in the next few years. One big problem here is there are just so many unknowns. It was mentioned earlier that Trump says a lot of things, and from experience, we know that he won't do everything that he threatens to do, but we have to anticipate that he will at least try to do most of it. And so every organization that is working in defending civil liberties in general, I think, has to really focus down and find their lane. And this is a time for both collaboration as well as amplification of each other's efforts, because no one person, no one group can do everything. So I think we're going to need to invest more resources in legal defenses for both individual journalists and maybe for media outlets as a whole, especially when we look at the potential threat of the FCC revoking broadcast licenses of media organizations that are critical of the administration. And I hate to put a crass point on it, but that it's expensive. And so a big question that remains is, what are we going to see in the world of fundraising for these types of efforts going forward? In the first Trump administration, there was a lot of energy poured into countering some of his threats, and groups like RSF and the Committee to Protect Journalists were able to raise a good deal of money to put directly into the fight against him. Now, it's too early to say how that's going to shake out this time around, but I'm hearing from a lot of other nonprofits that fundraising has been much trickier in the aftermath of this election. I think this is similar to the problem of news avoidance, which we've been seeing since the election, is that a lot of people who ought to be more engaged just don't want to tune in right now. There's definitely time for that to change. What's one thing about Trumpian politics is things can really change on a dime, and it's very difficult to predict what's going to happen. But I'm really going to be watching that space closely, because what we're able to do as a community is so directly tied to how much energy there is out there to do these things and how much money there is to fund them.
Okay, thank you. Miranda Spivak had her hand up as well. Miranda, tell us who you are and then ask a question if you would.
Hi, I'm a former Post reporter and editor, and have written a book that's coming out next year called Backroom Deals in Our Backyards, which is being published by the New Press. And it's actually, a lot of it has to do with efforts at the grassroots to overcome problems in communities. So that's the short answer. Professor Mason gave, I think, a really detailed and very eloquent explanation of the economic threats that the Trump administration's policies will pose. And, none of that is really a secret. And so I don't quite understand why that didn't get through to voters beforehand. I don't know who would be the right person to answer that question. But it seems to me there's no mystery that these economic policies will benefit the rich and hurt everybody else. So why didn't that matter if the economy, as Carville and others have always said, really is the pivotal issue?
Okay, who wants to answer that one?
I'm happy to speak to one point because Media Matters, we've done research on this.
Okay.
It's just not being covered specifically on cable and broadcast. I mean, we did a study that found that Trump was basically lying about how much his tariffs would reduce energy prices for people. And that was a key economic concern that people had across the political spectrum. I want to lower my energy prices. Trump was flat out lying about it, but I guess it was too wonky of a policy, deserved more than a couple mentions on broadcast and cable news. So I think, to me, part of the problem is that, and again, I'm specifically in my climate environmental lane, is that these issues just aren't covered with the depth and substance and quantity that they deserve. So thank you.
Okay.
I'm happy to speak to it as well before you move to.
Go ahead.
I spent a lot of time on the ground in this campaign, not as a columnist because I wasn't going back to the newsroom, but just talking to voters, not just for me, but because it was important for me to understand why so many people were not voting or not voting in certain ways. And I don't think we have ever really dealt with, or we have underestimated the damage that Trump did to the media for regular folks. There are people who literally, when they do hear it, do not believe it. And if they don't understand it, then they can't really apply it to their lives. And if we don't do something about that, to sort of do something about that gap in knowledge, you're going to see even more of what Miranda is talking about. It's not that voters didn't get it, it's that voters didn't get it. They didn't actually get the information and have some understanding of what happened. And the thing that challenged me the most was talking to young Black men in Detroit on the street who were voting for Trump. I don't want to take up all the time about all the reasons they thought they were voting, but it was very dismaying, the amount of information they didn't have and the information they thought they had that was true.
That also goes to the silo effect of today's news. Folks who get all their news from Fox or the TV conglomerate, the right-wing one, they don't know any other side. And so whatever Trump says seems logical and realistic, and they don't hear the other side. They don't have to go back and think about it and analyze it because what they're told is what they believe.
So I guess my
Hi,
question
Cynthia.
is, how does the media, I'm sorry, how does the media, I mean, you know, I think Harris's campaign in its very short iteration did a pretty spectacular job, but this message didn't get through. And, you know, I don't know how the media is going to penetrate it. Or as some of you, as Mr. Cooper said, you know, maybe they're just not even aware of it or schooled enough in it. But, you know, I think it's a huge problem.
Okay, Cynthia Robbins.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cynthia Robbins. I'm a civil rights attorney by training, policy advocate, and wife of Jackie Green. So that's what brings me to these journalistic circles. I think there are three key issues here. One that was shared, I didn't know that stat, and I can't remember now who shared it, but it was incredible about the news deserts going exceedingly like 90-some% for President-elect Trump. And in fact, I think it's the news desert context that really is the threat to our democracy. All of this work to challenge, I think it goes to fundamentals of education. People are not getting civics education. They don't understand the context. They don't understand how government works, including President-elect Trump, it seems. And so the role of the fourth estate and the press. And so I think we start from a context where people don't understand what's going on. And then we get to a place where they're challenging critical race theory. And nobody really seems to know what it is, but they don't like the word critical and they don't like the words race. So I mention that because we don't have critical thinking skills in the general electorate. And that is what leads to the capacity to just be persuaded by any assertion, whether or not it's factually warranted. And the other thing that I think is really, really scary is that we have people who are willing to stand up behind lies and behind mistruths and misdeeds and to make it all equal. So I think it was McAnally who said, we can't treat all sources equally and we can't cover it as if there are two sides to every issue, including hate speech and hate actions. So I think that there's a big job for the media. There's a huge job. And you're definitely going to be in a Sisyphus struggle going uphill, but you can't let the rock roll back on you.
I hear that. Let me ask Margaret Wang this question, and that is, what role does she think? What do you think about the cutback in teaching of accurate history, particularly history involving people of color, is playing in the mad dash to abolish a DEI and other anti-humanitarian efforts? Is this something we should be aware of, or do you think there's a connection?
Oh, there's no question, Richard. Thanks for the question to me. We have been seeing an onslaught across the states in the South against teaching accurate history, inclusive history, about changing the way that we share information with children about slavery, about genocide in this country, and even who we allow to teach us. There have been attacks on teachers who practice inclusive education in the classroom. We've seen teachers fired for reading books to their students. We're representing some of those teachers now in court and litigation. All of these efforts, Richard, are very much to attack public education and to divert state funding to private schools that will then perpetuate the ideologies that we're talking about. So this isn't actually about trying to reform schools, it's about trying to shut down schools. And we're going to be in trouble if we persist in allowing these smaller efforts at the grassroots level to go without counter. The good news is there are a lot of communities pushing back. We have seen many community organizations and just individuals in communities led by parents, led by librarians and teachers, insisting that the school continue to allow all perspectives and to be a welcoming place for all. And that's where some of our biggest gains will be. I think in the long run, that's how we're going to protect our democracy, by refusing to allow a few loud voices to transform public education into a tool against democracy. So that's absolutely something you should be paying more attention to. And for any of you who might be interested, we actually have an editorial team on staff. We recognize that it is often difficult in the Deep South to get alternative information that is accurate and inclusive in terms of thinking about DEI and the issues of communities of color. And so we are now writing our own pieces to try to get those stories out. And you're welcome to check out the site at www.splcenter.org. And we love partnering, just saying. Thanks.
That's great. That's great. Thank you. Thank you. Now, it's not every day that we have a former ambassador here. As Ambassador Ray, you still there?
Yes. Yes,
okay,
I am.
Good. Well, this morning, Trump talked about, yes, it's possible that we might leave, the United States might pull out of NATO if they don't pay up. And of course, he's known for his famous characterization, asshole countries of, but we also see some of these foreign leaders trying to make nice with Trump because they know that he will be the president and they will have to deal with him. So I'm wondering what you think of, first of all, the career people in the State Department who have to go with the flow no matter who's president, and what positive and negative things there might be happening with our relations with the rest of the world. We already talked about tariffs with Canada and Mexico. What else should we be mindful of?
Well,
that's a big question, I know.
Sorry. How many hours do we have to answer that question? No, this is, I just finished writing a piece on what could possibly happen with the career staff at the State Department after January 20th, and it's not pretty. because there's an effort that was turned back when Biden took office to politicize a lot of the civil service and foreign service jobs, anything that even remotely touches policy, to enable the president to fire people at will without having to go through the civil service procedures. And that's going to have a chilling effect on how people at low levels, very low levels in the department, do their jobs. The other is going to be probably a worsening of a problem that's been in existence for a long time, and that's the failure to staff adequately a lot of our embassies and consulates in key places, and especially places on the 54 countries of Africa. Very few of those embassies are fully staffed. Very few have been fully staffed for decades. Failure to appoint ambassadors, or to appoint ambassadors who are completely unqualified and dysfunctional when they arrive in country. So I think, forgetting the whole problem with this mass deportation, which is going to affect more than just Canada and Mexico, or threats to pull out of NATO, threats to pull out of the climate accord, which is going to cause a lot of our allies to trust us even less, and our adversaries to look for ways to aggravate the situation more. The turmoil among the low-ranking workforce is going to be tremendous, because people are going to be going into work the day after inauguration, not knowing if they're going to be fired that day. And when you have a situation like that, organizations, departments, bureaus cease to function. And so just trying to describe the impact that can have, the cascade effect, as countries look around and see that they can no longer go to an embassy to get valid, trustworthy information about what U.S. government policy is, because the people in the embassy don't know. The effect is just going to build over time. I hate to think what it's going to be like about 8-10 months from now, as some of these effects start to kick in.
Do you have any thoughts on what might happen in our own hemisphere with Cuba and Haiti and Venezuela and other places?
Well, I think you're going to see some real issues, and there's already rumblings. You have Canada and Mexico taking slightly different tacks in how to deal with Trump, and that's going to create some friction between Canada and Mexico if they don't coordinate their actions. If Mexico lives up to what it said, and that is refusing to take non-Mexican deportees, then the administration is going to have to start strong-arming other countries in the region. We already don't have very good relations with a large segment of the Southern Cone, and it's only going to get worse. I just see turmoil, basically, turmoil and uncertainty.
Okay. All right. More questions? Pat. Okay, wait. Professor Mason, I see, has got his hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to circle back for a minute and comment on a point that was raised earlier about critical race theory. The problem there isn't just the accurate teaching of history. It affects my discipline. It's the accurate teaching of economics. It's the accurate teaching of anything that goes against some really right-wing conservative ideas, right? So I published a book recently on economics of structural racism. I wrote that book, large portions of it, while I was a professor at Florida State University. The new law in Florida would make it impossible for me to teach that book, except it was challenged in court, right? So it's the propagation of ideas that certain people don't like, very conservative people. And it's not just critical race theory. In the state of Florida, there's a backroom attempt to undermine tenure. If you do not have tenured professors, You won't have anybody for the news media talk to explain complex issues, which then undermines the whole information process. So in the state of Florida, the entire education system was politicized from PK to PhD in terms of the content of what can be taught, in terms of what professors can say. It already has a chilling impact, right? Because young assistant professors who are just starting will stay away from these issues because it will affect the probability of getting a job, becoming tenured, and people will just be afraid. So it's not just history, it's everything that's taught. And it is an undermining of the entire public education system as a way of making it less legitimate, as a way of eventually privatizing it. Privatizing the education has always been a conservative goal, right? And this is one way of accomplishing that goal.
Okay. All right, Karen Berry has her hand up.
So I'm going to bring something up that's like probably going to be seen as out of left field, but toward the end of the election, Isabel Wilkerson, the author of Caste, was interviewed about her theory of caste, the caste system in America, and what's happening in the United States now. And I think someone, some journalist, somebody ought to explore a larger issue about race and the declining population of white people in America and how they are reacting to a loss of power. Because I think that has some that was an undercurrent in the election. I don't think mainstream journalists are willing to discuss it and explore the idea that white people are just taking it, they just can't handle it. And the reaction to a Black woman with South Asian ancestry being the first female president is just a little bit too far. And I also want to remind everyone, as we all know, that Trump didn't lose. He didn't win by a landslide. He won by like this much. So there was strong support for Harris, and I think there's some things about, she had 100 days to try to mount a campaign, and you think about that brief time and the fact that she, quote, almost won, which only works with hand grenades and horseshoes. But I think the idea that as we talk about how we should proceed from now in coverage of Trump, that we also should be talking about the nation and how they are reacting, because the so-called immigration problem could also be seen as a, quote, invasion of brown people from Latin America. It could be viewed in that way. And so I just want to bring that up as something that she certainly mentioned as a possibility, that this is going to keep coming up as an issue, that there will be 2 steps forward and then 4 steps back. You have progress in schools of teaching history, and then you have so-called critical race theory, which is so damaging supposedly to white children. It just comes back in a different form. The repression comes back in a different form when progress is made by Black people in America. So I think this is like not a specific issue as much as it is thinking about and that Black folks ought to be evaluating and talking and asking that question, and then asking that question of white people too, is how it looks like y'all aren't dealing with this very well. And the other thing I wanted to mention was that people they understand Trump's lies, and they wanted to believe in him for a certain reason, whatever their reasons were. But I heard it wasn't hard to be on TikTok or Facebook and see some of the manipulation that was going on. And I just saw people who believed in it. And I remember berating someone and saying, why are you posting this? The FEMA, remember the FEMA, the FEMA funding was supposedly going to immigrants, or some whack theory that came up during the election. And this young Black woman was posting a video by some Black woman. I don't know who she was. And I just fussed at her and said, go to the FEMA site. Why are you posting something by someone you don't even know who's lying, who's just basically lying? And the person was like, well, I just want to give a voice to, I just want to hear all voices, so I don't know how you get through the folks like that, but I just want to mention that people understood that there was lying going on, but I think the lies appealed to their wants and their opinions, and they're like, okay, I can get with this. So just those two things.
Okay, thanks, Karen. All right, Lynn Adrian, but before that, I have a question for Linda Jones, and that is the advice that she gave to Black women, does that also apply to Black men and to all men?
Oh, yes. I said that earlier.
Oh, sorry.
Definitely. Oh, yes. No, absolutely. And I mentioned women, and I've been focusing on women because of the, to go straight to it, the disproportionate rate that we're checking out as a result of all this chronic stress. But no, I did mention earlier that we need to have something in place for all of us across the board, given what they have said they're going to do and how they will be treating us. I'm wondering, a couple of things I was wondering as I was listening to everything is, can there be some coverage around churches that
good
may
point.
or may not be working with people who will be affected emotionally by what's going on and may not be able to go to therapy, or get counseling in any other way, because we're going to have jobs that are going to be lost. There's going to be a lot of anxiety. So even if there are stories highlighting churches that might be doing that, could cause an effect, to where there are more that may do that. And NABJ, can NABJ explore having some kind of wellness resource in place for these frontline political journalists that are going to have to deal with this guy and his MAGA folks on a regular basis? That can take its toll. So that's something that could also be explored. But I absolutely did mention men as well.
Okay, I have a question from Facebook before I get to Lynn. Did Jim Clyburn, I neglected to mention this, basically what happened to Jim Clyburn, who had been advertised to be here today? The answer is that his office told me that he developed a conflict, and so therefore he could not be here today, and he wanted to see if he could appear another time in December. After discussing it with the colleagues, I think we decided that December would be a little crowded, and so we put forth a question about whether he would be available in January. So we're waiting to hear about that. All right, now, Lynn Adrian.
Hey, I hope you can hear me outside, and that's why I don't want to have my camera on, but I'm going to bring up something that may be somewhat heresy. I think the majority of the journalists who are on our calls and in the roundtable came up through what we would call mainstream and legacy media. And I think there's a degree of hubris about the amount of clout that those media outlets still have. there was an article in the New Republic last month that talked about the echo chamber of right-wing media sources, not just Fox, but it was a plethora of websites and podcasts, and they just repeat to each other all the time. Those people aren't looking for information from any place else. It's not so much that the media that we are accustomed to isn't doing as good a job as they could, although I certainly think they could do better about discussing certain issues and things, and going off of what Karen just said. But these people are content where they are. And it may be that the effort is to find and develop other media outlets beyond the Times and the other places that we all aspire to work to in terms of legacy media. And I know that that is a hell of a thing to say, because good journalism costs money, and we all know that. And we all need the protections that come with working with a larger organization to be able to vet information. But I just think that if we keep on talking about how we didn't get the message through and what the Democrats should have done better, it ignores the way that the distribution of information has changed. And we need to really think about that.
Yeah, I agree with that. Okay, let's see. Michelle has to jump off. Okay, glad you joined us, Michelle. She had some questions and observations that she put in the chat. Michelle, an investigative reporter, an editor who had worked at USA Today, and for those who get the notices, they'll notice that we had an item about Biden's trip to Angola, and the fact that a woman on the trip who was the descendant of the very first Africans who came to the United States to be enslaved was on that trip. And she was on that trip thanks to the reporting that USA Today did in 2019, a team headed by Nichelle Smith. So thank you, Nichelle, for that. Elliot Francis, I see your hand is up.
Yes, it is. Thank you, Richard. Thank you. Good conversation going in here, although fortunately, Jim Clyburn couldn't join us today, but I look forward to him joining us sometime in the future. Going back to our discussion about disinformation in media, let me make a suggestion, if I can. It seems to me that part of the problem, and I'm preaching to the choir here, a large part of the problem is that people, I think, essentially would like factual information. However, they've lost the ability to do it and to not only find it, but determine factual information. We've had the inclusion of cable news, of course, over the years. Of course, now the internet, everybody seems to think that they're a reporter or publisher. Of course, that's not necessarily true, but people as a whole will look at all this and say, whatever I see, whether it's in video or print, is truth. Of course, it's not. And we've confused everything. We've blurred the lines. Nobody knows where to find it. My suggestion going forward, and I don't think this will solve all the problems, but maybe it will attempt to begin to mend our ability to tell people where to get the facts, is to develop a procedure of certification for journalists, in that journalists of all stripes, audio, broadcast, and print, would demonstrate a level of proficiency, which I'm sure everybody here could, and many of us would be able to do easily. At that certificate, at the end of that demonstration, we pledge to hold to a certain level of quality in our writing and in our presentation of facts. And with that pledge and with that demonstration of proficiency, be granted a certification, much in the same way that meteorologists are granted certifications. You have people who can tell the weather because they know how to manipulate things on the screen, and they have certain skills, but a meteorologist has a deeper, granular understanding of what that is. And when you see that seal, either in print or in broadcast, you understand that you're getting a level of quality that is unlike any other, unavailable anyplace else. And you gravitate to that. Hopefully, if that's put into place, outlets, news outlets will embrace it and hire those people, elevate those people, promote those people as journalists who you can depend on to give you factual, unbiased, objective information whenever possible. And in that sense, give people a better understanding of where to find the facts. Of course, there's a larger discussion to be held, and somebody mentioned it in here, and I agree, about critical thinking. I think that goes to the schools, but that's, again, a larger discussion about where we've strayed in terms of the people, the generations who've come up, who are losing this ability to think critically. So that's part of the paradigm as well. But it's always been something that I've discussed with a number of people over the years, and we've had back and forth conversations. And I think it's high time to consider the possibility of doing that to help us get down the road of fixing this problem, because, as somebody mentioned before, it's catastrophic. And if we don't get a handle on it, we're going to continue to go through this.
Right. I see John Watson had his hand up. John? Oh, unmute, please. Unmute.
But I did that. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Brother Francis, this is the gospel I had been speaking for 25 years.
You and me both.
Excuse me?
You and me both.
I made the mistake of calling it licensing, and someone said
I did too. You don't get a good response when you do that. Go on. I'm sorry.
And I made a book proposal, I guess 15 years ago, focusing on this. And in the process, I traced how attorneys and physicians became licensed. And journalists have been on that path for 100 years. The law schools and medical schools that are part of the process of licensing physicians and attorneys, they became accredited before they acquired the power to license or to prepare people for licensing. Every state in the United States, except for 2, has a minimum of 3 accredited journalism schools. And I think that is where the certification and licensing can start. Okay, I think you need academics or people who are purely devoted to the responsibility of journalism, as opposed to this fictional notion of freedom, to determine who is qualified, who has been trained properly to deliver certifiably reliable news. But this can't work. And here's another revolutionary idea that I think will get me stoned to death, is that you can't have this depend on marketplace fluctuations.
Yeah.
This has to be funded the same way as an election or a library or a public school is funded. It always has to be there, and it doesn't matter who's in the governor's office, the mayor's office, or the White House, or the Capitol. It has to be a fundamental democratic responsibility. We have to value responsibility over these foolish notions of press freedom. And the question people always ask me, who's going to decide? Well, someone's deciding now. And if the right people don't step up and insist on the right to decide, rich white men like Bezos will determine what good journalism is. And once we have this certification/licensing in place, we can let people know these are the people who are trained to do it. And you can listen and read those other people, that's fine. But if you really want to find someone who's professionally dedicated to giving you reliable information, go see a licensed journalist.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And one of the things I always add with people who have pushed back throughout the years, geez, certification, or again, licensing, which I had to drop that game as well. I point out to them that your barber or your hairdresser is licensed, has to be licensed, is obligated and required by law in some states to be licensed. They just cut your hair. Yeah. We carry information that is important to people's daily lives, to the political process, to a fair and open political process. And why wouldn't we want to certify that? Why wouldn't we want to make sure that we get we expose the very best to the consumer, giving them an even chance? Because not every consumer, I mean, I've tried, and not every consumer knows how to determine a fact, as simple as it is to us to determine a fact. So you've got to depend on people who you think know how to do this. And now it's all confused. But if we can at least give them give them not only the notion, but the assurance that this person is giving you the fact, then I think we've gone a long way in helping correct the situation. Again, not a complete and blanket solution to this problem, but I think a start.
Amen. Is Clayton still here from Reporters Without Borders? If not, I will just point out that this business about certifying who's a journalist and who's not has been tried in other countries to the detriment of good journalism. The people who are friendly to the administration get to be certified, and those who aren't don't. And the other thing is, for those who work for news organizations, the credibility of the news organization is usually indicates the credibility of the person who works for that news organization. In other words, you wouldn't get hired by a quality news organization if you weren't a quality journalist yourself. So a lot of people just say, well, it was in so-and-so, or it was on such network, and so therefore I believe this person is credible. So we already have that kind of certification. I think the problem is that all right, I know you disagree. Yeah. But I think that the bigger problem is the fact that more and more people are not trusting any of the news organizations, and they don't care whether you're certified or not. They heard it from their friend, or they saw it on social media, and that's good enough for them.
But they've never been given the opportunity to respond to a certification. So first thing is, let me take your first point, Richard.
Yes.
This should not be in any way, shape, or form connected with government oversight. That is, we talked about that also in all these discussions. No, we agree. That is completely out of the picture and would cause more problems than it would solve, certainly. But the landscape of journalism has changed. I think we can all agree to that. And it's going to continue to change long after we're gone. So some of the younger people who are coming up are actually changing it in ways. So the construct of what we believe, of what we know now as journalism with the big broadcast outlets and the newspapers will probably remain in some way, shape, or form. But what we're seeing is a ton of independent people who actually want to be journalists, but don't really quite know. And some of them are. Some of them are actually trained journalists. So you're going to find a lot more people who are just reporting, or many more people than there are now, who are independent. So they're not necessarily tied to a Washington Post or an NBC. So those people, I think, need to demonstrate their proficiency, giving the consumer a chance at saying, I think this person knows what they're saying and has given me the facts, so I can decide how to go forward with this information, or this person is not. I think it's at least worth discussion. Where it failed in other countries, that's other countries. This is the United States.
Okay, in the United States, Eddie Sargent says on the chat room, a licensed journalist can lie without repercussions, especially if they are independent. I hate to use her as an example, but 2 words, Janet Cook.
Yeah,
there's that term again, licensed journalist.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to Lynn Adrian, who's got her hand.
But Richard, a major component of this would be the news organization itself would have to be licensed, just like FCC broadcast stations are licensed. All right, because
who would do the licensing?
Again, that's the question.
Discussion. That's the
question.
That's part of the question.
People assume that it's so difficult that nobody should do it, but somebody will do it. And right now, it's rich white men who can own networks and newspapers.
It should at least be discussed, I think. I think is what we're saying.
Yes.
Could be under discussion. Yes, we are.
Okay, Lynn Adrian. Did you have your hand up still? Or is that from before?
I'm sorry, I should have put it down, but I actually am grateful that you came back, because, again, and I don't mean to be insulting, That's hubris. The public, our audience, the readership, etc., is deciding every day who they want to trust or not, and what they want to seek out or not. And the idea that some overarching Uber organization will say, this is a credible journalist, and they don't believe it because it doesn't match up to their belief system. How do you counter that?
But the
How do we
people,
counter
but
that?
people will still get a chance to make a decision on their own. And you open the
They're
conversation.
making decisions right now. That's
And
why I was
how's
saying
that?
about that.
And how's
That's
that
why I
work?
said
And how is that working out?
I'm not saying that it is a good thing. I'm just saying that it is already happening. That was why I made mention of that article in the New Republic and the echo chamber of right-wing and conservative media. And those people are very happy to stay in that lane. They don't want to go out. They aren't
Because they're
looking
not
for
being
something.
given, they're not being given an
No,
alternative.
there are alternatives all over the place, which include the New York Times and legacy media, the media that we are accustomed to, the people, ABC News, NBC, that we worked for in the past. These people are making choices not to go there, and that's how the viewership and the readership is going down.
Because they don't know
You're
how to
acting as
identify
though
facts. Let me give you an example.
No, please let me
Go ahead. Go ahead.
No. What I'm saying is that these people, they're making decisions that you don't like. I don't like them either. But I'm saying that maybe we need a different approach as opposed to giving it the impetus of our saying that these are credible certified journalists. They want something else, and maybe we need to think harder about how to give them that.
So what's your suggestion?
I don't have it. I admit it.
This I think should be discussed in detail if there's in the absence of any other suggestions. People have a profound difficulty right now in determining fact from fiction. I deal with this every week in live forums in the digital world. Believe me, I've heard all the discussions. They believe it to their heart, and what they're reading, what they're hearing, what they're seeing is fact. And it's not because they don't know how to determine fact from fiction. They've lost that critical thinking. And I mentioned that earlier on. That's a larger discussion about why people have lost the ability to think critically. And we have these generations coming up that's just gone into the ethos. That has to be corrected as well. But until we can, this is just one part of a discussion. And again, it's at its infancy. So I'm not willing to say or insist that it should be governed by government or an independent organization or Medill or whatever. We need to discuss it and figure it out, because John is right. If we don't get a handle on it, we're going to lose that handle, just like we lost this handle in this election 10 years ago or before, during the Tea Party. We didn't address it, and we didn't talk to those people in the flyover, and they're lost now. And they're lost for a lot of reasons. And one is because we didn't address them. And if we don't address this, we'll lose this fight as well.
I think you guys should get together and come up with a proposal for the next meeting.
Richard, I think it's my turn next.
Yes.
Okay. Someone a little while ago used the term catastrophic. So I want to make sure that Mr. Francis and Watson have a full discussion about this issue, because I don't want them to think it hasn't been. We are discussing it, as you said. And there are three things that are very important. Number one is we have got to stop believing that people don't have the information. There are plenty of people who have information, and they're dismissing it because it didn't come from who they believe. The second thing is, it doesn't matter what body you create or what body you tap to do some type of certification. All it takes is a demagogue to say they're not real, their news is fake, they give this to anybody, and you will have the same problem where nobody will believe that they're certified or that they are more skilled or more intelligent than someone else. But this is one of the most important things. Here in the city of Detroit, a fifth of our households don't have the internet at all. 40% don't have access to high-speed internet. And the circulation of the Detroit Free Press dropped from 600,000 to less than 100,000. The idea that we're going to make any kind of change through those legacy avenues that we've had for so long is folly. If you want a suggestion, I think it was either Mr. Francis or Mr. Watson asked for one. If you want a suggestion, we have to change how we're delivering the news. We have to make sure that we're talking to people where they are and not assuming that we can bring them somewhere by saying you can trust it. There is no trust anymore. The damage to journalism has been catastrophic, and it's not going to matter that somebody says they're good. I'll give you one last example. I am, with great regret some days, a graduate of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where the journalism school has been purchased by a white publisher who has put his philosophy for what journalism should be on the walls of the school, who kept the school from hiring, a very prominent journalist because he disagreed with her, and who, quite frankly, to make sure that people know what good journalism is creating a center on the campus that they said it's not connected to the campus. He's just renting some space to laud and appreciate good journalism, which means the journalism that he and other white billionaires who are trying to get rid of DEI in North Carolina think is good journalism. That is a de facto certification process that you would have to fight when you're trying to find somebody to tell them that other people are more qualified. So I wanted to make sure you heard some of that as we're talking about this. If we've been able to do this 25 years ago because it's not new, then there might have been a chance. I don't think it's possible now because of what we're dealing with, and because you've got a president who wants a Fox News anchor to be the head of the Department of Defense.
First of all, your last statement alone, it doesn't necessarily prove my point, but gets into what I was trying to say before. Fox has no anchors. People over the years have been conditioned to think that an anchor gives them factual information, and that should be true. And that there are opinion journalists who have opinions, and that was clearly stated, that was clearly defined in the years past, 25 years and before. The lines have been crossed, the lines have been blurred. People think that the person giving me opinion is a reporter, is somebody giving me factual news information. And the anchor is lying to me because we're not, those lines have been blurred and those positions are not defined anymore. And that carries over into print, carries over into audio. It's all mixed up.
It's not just Fox, Mr. Francis, it is every.
Oh no, I didn't say it was. Absolutely. Goes across the landscape. It's everywhere. Frankly, they've been talking about the descent of some of the ratings in some of the cable news outlets and the possibility of them going away. I wouldn't lose a bit of sleep over it because they've helped muddle the landscape in a way that now news, at least broadcast news, certainly not print. Thank all of you who've worked so long and so hard in the print form for all these years. But in broadcast and certainly in cable, it's turned it into entertainment. And it no longer serves the consumer as something that is remotely resembles news.
I don't want to be Debbie Downer, Mr. Francis, but it is also print. Everything now is about how many clicks you can get on a story or a podcast or, a video. And nobody is, oh my God, this is the city of Detroit. And for a while, there was no city hall reporter from either newspaper covering the city council. There are major changes in print and television that make what we used to think was reparable almost irreparable.
I'll accept that, but I still think print has a hold on something that broadcast and cable lost long ago, and more cable than broadcast, because I still think the nightly newscasts on broadcast hold to some standard, but the cable's long gone, long lost. So yeah, I would agree with you there.
Okay, can you two guys come up with something to present to us at the next roundtable?
Oh, seriously, I'd be more than happy to. Just promise me that I won't get stoned to death by anybody who sees me on the street, because I'm really attacking some really deeply held values. Yes. Oh, also, as an alumnus of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, you may have noticed there was absolute frantic pushback by the faculty in the journalism programs. And they had to push back without winning because they don't have the power or the money. And this is one of the problems I'm talking about we have to deal with. And Brother Francis, yes, we'll get together and prepare.
Absolutely. Let's trade information. I sent you something, direct message to you, and let's get together and not worry about the slings and arrows because they will obviously come.
Okay. I'll just put this out there too, because in doing one of the birthday greetings on Facebook, I was reminded that we had a similar discussion about compiling oral histories of journalists of color as a roundtable, and everybody said, "Oh, great idea, you know." But it didn't take off anywhere. So that's another thing sitting on the table waiting to be picked up. All right, now we're going to go into our introductions now. I want to call on the people who have not said anything, and I'm going to start with Sheila Solomon. Introduce yourself and just say a few words. Sheila, where are you? Oh, she must have stepped away then. Okay, Daryl Fears. Daryl, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Thanks for having me, Rich. I appreciate it. I was a Washington Post reporter for nearly a quarter century, and I've worked for the LA Times, Detroit Free Press, and the Atlanta Constitution.
Do you have any observations to make?
That the certification process seems to be a suggestion that's a response to the rebranding of media by a demagogue. And I don't think that that credential will protect journalists or end the confusion over what it is exactly that journalists do. I think the journalists are very bad at explaining what it is that journalists do. And that's part of the problem. But I think that Trump is a unicorn, and you can't really stop you can't really blunt some of the things that he's doing because he's doing it well. So I just don't think that is. I think that's just another bureaucratic layer that won't mean much in the end. So that's my observation, and I hate to be negative, but I'm glad that someone's discussing it and that they're gonna get
Okay,
together.
thanks, Daryl. Mark McCormick.
Let's see.
You're on.
Oh, I'm on. You can hear me?
Yes.
Great. I am a columnist for State's Newsroom, and I've recently ascended to a new job where I am the executive director of the Kansas Black Leadership Council. I'll reiterate what I put in the chat, that the challenge is that it'll be really difficult to escape the inequality in the society. When my freshman year at the University of Kansas, I remember my tuition was $700. It's now $40,000 a year. It'll be hard for us to create some kind of entity that at some point wouldn't make the accreditation that we're seeking inaccessible to broad sweeps of people. I think that's the challenge. And I'm also a trustee at the school. What we're seeing is that fewer and fewer people are actually entering news editorial. They're opting for advertising and strategic communications. So this craft that we all love so much has fallen out of favor. And I'll leave it there.
Okay, thanks. Benita Bing. You there, Benita? Samsung?
Yeah, I'm here. Hello. I'm
Hello,
Benita.
tell us who you are and if you have any observations.
Yes, Benita Bing. I am the president of the Exposure Group, African American Photographers Association, located here in Washington, D.C. I've worked on Capitol Hill for 40 years now. And this was a very enlightening conversation about journalism and everything. I agree with pretty much everything that everyone has said, because you're right. People, the news, I mean, when I was doing reporting up on Capitol Hill, I was on the radio side. You only have like 30 seconds to give information to people. And, you have to pick and choose what information you want to give to them that would be important and very beneficial to them, which is kind of challenging at times. So that's the observation, and the media industry has really gotten out of hand and just so crazy right now. So it's going to be a challenging situation for journalists this time.
Okay, thank you, Benita. Lorraine Brown. No.
Okay, sorry, it took me a minute to. I'm Lorraine Brown. I was a reporter for several years, last working in Jackson, Mississippi at a Gannett newspaper, which is now the Skeletons, one of the Skeletons about which I posted in the chat. It is surprising and disappointing to see how many newsrooms either have no reporters or have a very few reporters who have no opportunity to do justice to serving a community.
I know that. I know that's right. Okay, Margaret, do you have any parting thoughts?
Well, I just want to thank you, Richard, for this invitation and to encourage all of you. We actually do need all of you. And no matter whether you come up with a new accreditation system or not, what this world does need is journalists who aren't afraid to speak truth to power. And we're going to need a lot more of that over the next 4 years. So I hope all of you will check out our resources on our website. I mentioned it earlier. I'll put it in the chat. But it's important that we continue to keep lines of communication open. Reach out if you can use any of our resources or if we can be a help to you in your reporting and media work. And I wish all of you the best of luck because we're going to need it. Very grateful for the time, Richard.
All right, glad you could participate. Hazel Trice-Edney.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Richard. I'm Hazel Trice-Edney, Editor-in-Chief of the Trice-Edney Newswire, President and CEO of Trice-Edney Communications, and also an adjunct professor at the Kathy Hughes School of Communications at Howard University. I teach multicultural media history and entrepreneurship, communications entrepreneurship. I have remained somewhat restrained on this particular conversation because it has actually inspired me in a powerful way to write something that I've been holding back on. And so I won't say what that is in front of this audience of journalists, but I will e-blast it. And so maybe somebody else might be inspired by it. And mainly I've been holding back on it because I don't want to, well, you'll read the piece and you'll understand why someone from the Black press, such as myself, has kind of held back on this piece, but I don't want to ever be accused of being afraid. And so I'm going to jump out there and I will tell the story and do it without fear. I also just want to add to, I put in the chat a recent piece that my newswire ran that was written by Hamil Harris. And that was in response to Linda Jones's suggestion that we do stories on churches and what churches are saying about the recent response to the election results. And Hamil Harris did a great job in interviewing some pastors, et cetera, and how they're like comforting the people.
All right, thank you, Hazel. Gene Sadler is back.
Hi. Can you hear me, Richard?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much. I've been away for quite a while. Many of you don't know me. Many years ago, I was a correspondent for Time magazine and later the Wall Street Journal, and then did some communications work on the federal and regional level in DC. I'm originally from Detroit. I'd like to say hi to Rachel, and glad you're doing that great work in my hometown. I wanted to say, of all the suggestions we hear, maybe we should have a roundtable that looks at more than one approach. I don't think there is one answer. I think there may be short-term and long-term approaches. I think maybe we need to be writing some lyrics for our rappers or doing something that will get to an audience that is from people who are trusted. I'm not discounting I'm not a big fan of the certification thing, but I'm not discounting anything. But we need to think about there are several routes that need to be taken here. And that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Glad you're back. Roger Witherspoon, briefly, please.
Oh, good afternoon, and I hope everybody's having a healthy, happy holidays. I've been doing this for almost, can you hear me?
Yes.
Fine. I've been doing this for almost 60 years. And in the early days, tended to travel armed. I haven't seen much of that lately, but I'm curious to know what you think might be necessary for reporters, particularly Black reporters, in the next era of Trump. Have a nice day and happy holidays.
Okay. Thank you, Roger. Anthony Wilson. Unmute, please.
Unmuted.
All right.
All right. Thank you, Richard. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Anthony Wilson. I was till recently reporter and anchor for WTVD, the ABC affiliate owned by ABC and Disney here in the Raleigh-Durham area. This has been a fascinating, one of the most fascinating roundtables I've attended. I appreciate the opportunity to listen. I share the concern of everybody who's talked about the future of our business. One of the other things I do now that I'm semi-retired is try to educate the up-and-coming journalists. And we have a real challenge ahead, as some of these kids are primarily performance-oriented. I'm not going to slam TikTok completely, but a lot of these kids get their information, as do other people who are not children or teenagers, from TikTok. There's a possibility that that's where information is going, but as we said in this discussion, when it's unfiltered and it's mostly opinion as opposed to facts, there's a problem. So I tip my hat to those folks who have called attention to the need to get certified, but I'm not sure how that's going to happen. In the meantime, I also cheer those people who are still in the trenches trying to make sure the information, the accurate information, gets out there.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Anthony. LaToya Parker is here from the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies. LaToya,
Yes.
do you have
Hi.
any observations to make?
Sure. Well, first, I want to say thank you, Richard, for the invitation to join this important and timely discussion. Again, my name is LaToya Parker, and I'm a senior researcher in the Office of the President at the Joint Center of Political and Economic Studies, where I lead on work on economic policy and tax policy. I also work closely with our President, Deidre Asante Muhammad, on racial wealth and equality initiatives. As America's Black think tank, we are dedicated to advancing policies that address racial wealth and equality and promote Black economic mobility. So collaborating with you all would be wonderful in terms of informing you, educating you on the critical issues, such as this critical policy window during this presidential transition year. And one of the priorities we are focusing on, among other economic policy issues, is the upcoming expiration of the Tax Cut and Job Act. It ends in 2025. So it includes the sunsetting of key provisions such as the earned income tax credit and the child tax credit, which disproportionately impact Black families and communities. And to help shape these discussions, the Joint Center will be hosting convenings, one which is coming up in February to explore tax reform and opportunities in green economy. So we see this as a moment to advance bold solutions and ensure that equity remains at the forefront of economic policy. And I would love to connect and collaborate with all of you and amplify these issues. I'll share my contact information in the chat, and I look forward to continuing these critical conversations. Thank you again for the invite.
Excellent. Okay, thank you, LaToya. Julian, you have your hand up.
Well, I just wanted to introduce myself and also
Yes,
thank you
please
for the
do.
invitation. I'm Julian
Yes.
Teixeira. I'm the Chief Communications Officer at the Southern Poverty Law Center. But I started my career, as like all of you, as a journalist. I was at USA Today and a paper in Pittsburgh that's no longer there. And like many of us got out of the field. But I also teach at Johns Hopkins University in the graduate school. And I know I told Richard this. But I think one of the things that we need to do is we need to, those of us who are teaching, because many of us teach, is really start like any, when I was younger, I probably didn't read a newspaper as much as I do now or online news, but all of my projects require students to do something with a media. So it's either television news, online news, because I tell them, like, I bring in the Washington Post and I'm like, I know all of you don't read this in paper or print, but you know what, you can get it online. And at the beginning of the course, I do ask this question, like, where do you get your news? And it's all social media. And I tell them, you know, if you don't, if you continue with that, you're going to fail this course. And that really changes their mood. And at the end of the course, I ask the question, where did you get your media? And how did you, and they're like, oh, I started reading the Washington Post online. I started to listen on YouTube to the nightly broadcast, but I incorporate all of that in all of their projects as well. Every project at the end has some kind of media analysis or some kind of meeting. So I think we need to really build an audience for the future. And that's one way we could do it. And the last thing I'll suggest, at the Southern Poverty Law Center, we had an election campaign this year. We did a lot of polling on young people. We felt, you know, they were very apathetic. And we did turn to influencers to get them to vote. Have we ever thought as journalists to turn to influencers to get them to read news, or what, to have an influencer introduce them or educate them about what the mainstream media and the importance of it? So we could use some of these tools that are being used against us, maybe to fight back and to try to really build you know, rebuild the audience that we need in order for our survival.
Okay, please put in the chat how people can get in touch with you then also.
Oh, I definitely will.
Yeah, Jackie Green, producer of the broadcast.
Hi. Thank you guys for joining us. It's been a fascinating discussion as always. A lot of great information. And I was just thinking, worked at St. Pete Times, Boston Globe, and formerly of the USA Today, that the industry is going through a paradigm shift. And we have to figure out how to adjust to that. It's a disruption of how business used to be. And we're talking again about licensing, and that was kicked around by the professional associations some time ago, and as it was said earlier, got nowhere here. But I do think that maybe there should be a convening of journalists, educators, professionals, owners, association members, and all stakeholders to try to figure out a path forward. You know, we can sit around and kick the can around now, but we all recognize that the industry has done a shift. And now we're playing catch up. You know, the audience has moved on. So how do we get back in front of the audience? And while we're trying to get back in front of the audience, we have to bring about all those things we talked about, credibility here. But if you're not in front of the audience and they're not listening to your podcast or your webinar or your broadcast, you know, you don't have them, particularly in the Midwest, in those, quote, news deserts where there's only one source. So for our next broadcast or, you know, roundtable, let's kick the idea around about how do we deal with an industry disruption in a new paradigm shift.
Okay, thank you. Rochelle, is your hand up? Okay.
Unmute.
I'm Brahmi.
No, it was, and I apologize. It's hard to unmute. Because
Please be brief, though.
Yes, I will. Because I spoke earlier, I didn't want to say a lot. I want to be sure to thank LaToya Parker, because I don't think people understand how important the Joint Center is. They were my first call before Harvard or any place else when I was writing. And I also do have an idea that I will send to the committee that's now being formed to talk about how to regain our credibility. I'm not going to join it, but if we don't partner with the churches, which used to do this, when I was a journalist in Dallas, the largest church in Dallas used to every Tuesday have a gathering where they talked about what was the most important news, what people should pay attention to. The churches used to do that, not just for politics, but for everything. But if we want to try and get to audiences in a way that means something to them and they might pay attention to, that's just one of the suggestions. And I also want to thank the gentleman who just spoke. Oh my God, he put his, Mr. Sargent. Yes, I'm happy to help you on the ex-prisoners. I was a reporter at the Washington Post and at the Dallas Morning News, the deputy managing editor of the Courier Journal, and then I went to Detroit for 20 years, where I now don't work in journalism all the time, but I remain a writer by trade, warrior by necessity, so I do continue to write.
Good line, good line. All right, I'm El Brahmi.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Richard, for having me today. It was a great roundtable. I am a PhD candidate at Columbia School of Journalism. I am French, Algerian, and American. I live in Connecticut, and I'm writing my dissertation on the integration of Black reporters in the mainstream newsrooms in the 60s, early 70s. So if anyone here belongs to this category of people, you're welcome to get in touch with me. I have a thought on the idea of licensing. It's something that I've actually thought about as well, in terms of like this, dichotomy between fake news and mainstream news, which is reporting on the truth. And we've been talking about it quite a bit with my advisor, Michael Schutzen, and he also makes that comparison with lawyers and doctors, like you did, Elliot, where he says that doctors and lawyers do have a license, and we trust them for what their job and to take care of us or heal us because they have a license. And he's also thinking that it's strange that it doesn't exist for journalists. The conversation, however, has not developed further. But I was thinking about it as well in terms of, the ethics, like giving a license in terms of like, having the license and the ethics of reporting on the truth.
They don't like that word license, by the way.
Yeah. Like having or like having some kind of credential that would mean that, you are reporting on the truth, and it's like some kind of swear that you would report on the truth, like some kind of commitment. But then I think that the truth is also a moving target. And, like before the 1960s, for instance, the legacy outlets were reporting on the state of affairs, but they were not reporting on all of it. And so giving legitimacy with a sort of credential to legacy news outlets or the mainstream outlets who are claiming that are reporting on the truth may not be fitted either. And also I wonder if it might come in tension with the First Amendment, freedom of speech and freedom of expression, freedom of press. And whether, is it possible to block some outlets to enter the news market in that respect? Those are just thoughts that came to me as you guys were speaking.
Okay, thank you, Amel. Appreciate that. Let's see who has not spoken yet. I see Eddie Sargent. Eddie Sargent is next.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. This has been a fascinating conversation. This is Edward Sargent. I'm going to start from the current piece. I'm building a publishing company focusing on books and other types of media by ex-offenders. I was the spokesman for the prison system here. Before that, I was with the Washington Post. Before that, I was with the Washington Informer, the Capital Spotlight, St. Louis American. I'm very focused on local journalism, and we're real passionate for local journalism. If I may, what I see right now, currently and across the media and the community, is I don't see the debate. I don't hear the debate, even in this meeting, with all respect. The Republican voices. We're talking about Republicans, Black Republicans, but I haven't heard them speaking on this meeting. And I think we need to do something about that, because as a journalist, what I like about journalism, and I'm independent in terms of politics, is the whole idea of the clash of ideas, the debate, get people in there talking about where they stand. And I believe in a town hall meeting nationally, a series, if you will, and Jackie Green pretty much kind of touched upon this. Yeah, if we believe that Black journalists, Black Republicans, are pretty much, let's say, handkerchief heads, Tom, Uncle Toms, etc., whatever derisive word you want to use, give them an opportunity to expose themselves. All right, so just wrapping up, I would like you to know that, yeah, I'm working on this challenging project, building a publishing company. We need to get ahead of the people. Like Jackie said, we need to go ahead and get ahead of the people. And how you do that? It's pretty easy as far as I'm concerned. You just get in there. You get in those sites where people are talking crazy, et cetera, and you say, hey, man, look, check out the truth. And you send them to a website. I'm going to insert a piece, a link to a story I did about this very controversial influencer named Charleston White. He's like a Petey Green and Dick Gregory and a lot of other very outspoken comedians. And I believe he's got some good things to say in the midst of all his madness.
Ed, you got to cut it. All right. To your point about the Black Republicans, this is a 2-hour meeting. If we had Black Republicans in here too, it would be 3 hours. We don't need that. All right. Next, we have Christian Spencer, who posted an idea in the chat. But if you want to expand on that, Christian, are you still there?
Unmute.
Okay, you're on. Can't hear you. Okay, well, we'll move on then. All right. Is there anybody else, particular speakers, who wanted to have a last word before we cut this off?
Yeah, I'd like to say a couple things. Thank you for inviting me, first of all. And I believe in pretty much meeting people where they are, and we need to get more scholars on TikTok, and scholars are on TikTok informing people, and it'll be easier getting into some of those spaces than to try to get them into our spaces that are dying, if we're talking about newspapers. Number two, I really believe in being in a state of readiness, not just physically for our own security, going into the new year, but mentally. We say Black don't crack, but when it comes to our mental and emotional health, it can with what we'll be facing. So I really think that we should look into the churches for real, because that's where so many of our people are, and hire somebody to be on there, not just gather, and talk, but really have people ready to deal with it, with the reproductive justice, and then I'll end it, reproductive justice issues that are coming, and the mental health of women in general, but Black women in particular, when we consider about the mortality rates and all that. We need to be in that state of readiness to deal with this if we're going to function at all. All right, so thank you.
Hey, Richard, if I could concur with Linda, and just by way of introduction and qualification, you may not know me. I spent 45 years as a news anchor, reporter in a number of broadcast outlets, CNN, Fox, Johnson Publishing, and ABC7 in Washington, D.C., among others. Now producing and hosting a digital platform, now with Elliot Francis, on Facebook and YouTube, and more recently on TikTok, because we found it necessary to go where some of these folks live. The jury's still out on it, because TikTok is fluctuating and may be gone in about a month.
Over time now.
As much as
overtime.
Okay, I'll end it quickly. But I think that it makes perfect sense, and we found many of those Republicans and many of those counter voices in some of the live, because they're all live situations that we're on TikTok, and they're not always useful, but they're always interesting and somewhat constructive. So we're trying to get there.
And lastly, I can be reached at thewritingdoula.com. If any of you would like to talk about this anymore, I would love to.
Okay, McNally Torres has just left, but she left a message saying that she would love to join the committee that you all are forming. So if you need her contact information, it should be in the chat, but if not, I have it. And I'll ask Professor Mason if he has a last word.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. I enjoyed this discussion, and it's very helpful as someone, as an economist, to listen to, I guess, a group of mainly journalists, but we could use a lot more of this cross-pollination rather. Enjoyed it. Thank you.
Well, you're always welcome to come back.
Okay, I'll do that.
All right, very good. Okay, well, thanks everybody. There are a lot of comments in the chat room, and we will print them out, and they will be sent to everybody who has an email address that they've shared, hopefully today. And this will be also forwarded to YouTube, so there will be a YouTube link that's coming as well. So thanks very much. Happy holidays, and we hope to see you all in January.
Thanks, Richard. Everybody.
Thank
you all.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Richard. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Bye-bye.
All right.
So long, Richard.